Promotion went to Mike. The VP said it at 5:08 p.m. I remember because the conference room had one of those long digital wall clocks above the door, and I had been watching it count down the last hour like a fuse. Glass walls all around us. The kind of office where every conversation feels like a presentation, even when it isn't. Everyone congratulated him. I just nodded. That was it. That was the moment. There were 9 people in the room, 6 directors, 2 VPs, and me. Mike sat across from me, slightly off-center, the way he always positioned himself in meetings, close enough to leadership to be seen, far enough to look humble about it. When the VP made the announcement, Mike did the smile he had been practicing for weeks. Surprised, but not too surprised. Grateful, but not too grateful. Just the right amount of everything. I nodded once. That was all. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 47 years old. And in that moment, I was the senior manager of strategic operations at a company I had given 12 years of my life to. 12 years. Not a number I throw around casually, because it took me a long time to understand what it actually meant. 12 years is 2 recessions, 3 reorganizations, 4 VPs, and 1 client portfolio I had built almost entirely from scratch. 12 years is the difference between the company you join and the company you eventually outgrow without noticing. And Mike had been there for 3. The VP kept talking. Something about transition timelines, about Mike's vision for the department, about how excited leadership was for the next chapter. I caught fragments. Forward-looking, strong leadership profile, right voice at the right moment. The phrases blurred together because none of them were about me and none of them needed to be. The decision had already been made. This meeting wasn't an announcement, it was a formality. I looked at the table in front of me. There was a printed agenda, a half-finished cup of coffee, and a pen I had been clicking earlier without realizing. My hand was still on it, but it wasn't moving anymore. I noticed that. I noticed a lot of small things in that meeting, the way you do when something inside you finally gets quiet enough to hear everything around you. To my right, one of the VPs was watching me just for a second. The kind of look people give when they expect a reaction and aren't sure what to do when it doesn't come. I didn't give him one. I didn't look away either. I just held the moment until he turned back to face the front. That was the first time I felt it. Not anger. Not yet. Something cleaner than that. A kind of stillness that doesn't come from being calm, it comes from understanding. After the announcement, people stood up, chairs sliding back, hands extending toward Mike. Congratulations, well-deserved, looking forward to working with you. The room got louder in that careful, professional way rooms get when no one wants to acknowledge what just happened to the other person in it. I shook Mike's hand when he turned toward me. Firm grip, eye contact, the words you're supposed to say. He thanked me. I told him I was happy for him. Neither of those things was true. What was true was that I had been preparing the strategic report Mike would use to justify his first quarter in the role. What was true was that the portfolio he was about to lead, I had built. What was true was that he was going to walk into Monday morning and inherit 12 years of work he didn't fully understand yet. And no one in that room except me knew it. I walked out of that glass office at 5:14 p.m. 6 minutes after the announcement. I remember the time because I checked my phone in the hallway, and the number on the screen felt like it should have weighed more than it did. 12 years of loyalty. They had called it timing, and I was the only one in that room who knew that timing wasn't what it had been. The drive home that night was the quietest one I had taken in years. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't take any calls. I just drove, hands at 10 and 2 like I was learning how to do it again, watching the city move past the windows in slow, even frames. The strange part was that I wasn't thinking about Mike. I wasn't thinking about the VP. I was thinking about a Tuesday in February, 4 years ago, when I had stayed in the office until almost 1 a.m. fixing a contract issue that would have cost us a 7-figure client. No one had asked me to stay. No one had even known there was a problem. I had just seen it forming and decided to handle it before it became something the company would have to explain. That was the work. That had always been the work. I pulled into my driveway just after 7 p.m. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see my wife, Karen, moving around in the kitchen. 21 years of marriage teaches you how to read someone from across a room, and she already knew. I hadn't told her anything yet. She just knew. She does that. When I walked in, she didn't ask. She just poured me a glass of water, slid it across the counter, and waited. I appreciated that more than I could explain. Some conversations don't need to start with questions. Some conversations start when the other person decides they're ready, and Corinne had learned a long time ago that I needed the door to open from my side. I told her about Mike. I told her about the room. I told her about the 6 minutes between the announcement and the hallway. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pace. I just laid it out the way I laid out everything, in order with the relevant details, no embellishment. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked one question. "What are you going to do?" That was Corinne. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't ask if I was okay. She asked what I was going to do, because she knew that for me, those questions were the same thing. I told her I didn't know yet. That was the truest answer I had. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was upset, because I was thinking. There's a difference between not sleeping because your mind is racing and not sleeping because your mind is finally working at the speed it should have been working at for years. I lay there in the dark and ran through 12 years of decisions, 12 years of moments where I had chosen the company over myself, 12 years of times I had told myself that staying loyal was a kind of strategy. It wasn't. I could see that clearly now. Loyalty had been my default, not my plan. Around 2 a.m. I got up, went to the kitchen, sat at the counter with my phone in my hand. I opened LinkedIn. I hadn't updated my profile in almost 3 years. The headline still said Senior Manager of Strategic Operations at a company that, 12 hours earlier, had told me I was not the future. I didn't change anything yet. I just looked at it. Then I scrolled through my connections. Old colleagues, former managers, people I had worked with at industry events. People who had left over the years, some to better roles, some to companies I had quietly watched grow into competitors. There was one name I kept landing on: Stephen Hale. He had left us 4 years ago. He was now a senior director at our biggest rival. We had stayed in touch loosely, the way people in the same industry do, but I hadn't reached out to him in over a year. I sent the message at 2:17 a.m., 3 sentences. No urgency, just an opening. Stephen replied at 6:43 a.m. That detail mattered to me, because anyone who answers a LinkedIn message before 7 a.m. is either an insomniac or someone who has been waiting for a reason to start the conversation. Stephen wasn't an insomniac. His message was short. "Good to hear from you. Coffee this week. I have a window Thursday morning if it works." I read it twice. Then I read the timestamp again. He hadn't asked what I wanted to talk about. He hadn't asked how things were going at the company. He had skipped all of the small talk that usually fills these exchanges and gone straight to a calendar slot. That told me something. It told me he already knew, or at least suspected, why I was reaching out. And it told me he was open to the conversation that was about to happen. I confirmed Thursday at 8 a.m. before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. The next 2 days at the office were strange. Not bad, strange. I went in at my normal time. I sat through my normal meetings. I responded to my normal emails. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, everything had. There's a specific kind of clarity that comes from knowing you're already on your way out, even if no one else knows it yet. Every conversation feels lighter. Every decision feels smaller. Things that would have stressed me out a week earlier barely registered, because I was no longer playing the same game everyone around me was playing. Mike came by my office on Wednesday afternoon. He knocked on the open door, leaned against the frame, and gave me a version of the smile I had seen the day before. Smaller this time. More private. "Hey," he said. "You got a minute?" I told him I did. He came in and sat in the chair across from my desk, and for the first time in 3 years I noticed how young he looked. Not physically, posturally. The way he sat. The way his hands moved when he talked. The way he framed everything as a question even when it wasn't. He wanted to talk about the transition. He said he wanted my support. He said he knew this was probably difficult for me and that he respected everything I had built. He said he hoped we could work closely together over the next few months because, in his words, I was the institutional memory of the department. Institutional memory. I remember the phrase exactly because it was such a careful way to describe what I actually was. Not the architect, not the engine, the memory. Something you reference when you need to know how things used to work. I told him I was committed to a smooth transition. That was the line I used, committed to a smooth transition. It was the same line I had used dozens of times in client communications when I was preparing to gracefully exit a relationship. He didn't catch it. He thanked me. He said he would set up a recurring weekly meeting so we could align on priorities. Align. That word again. Every time I heard it now, it landed differently. When he left, I closed the door behind him, not in anger, just in punctuation. I sat back down at my desk and opened the folder on my computer where I kept all of my project documentation. 12 years of work, organized by client, by quarter, by initiative. Everything labeled, everything searchable. I had built that folder for the company, but somewhere along the way it had also become a record of who I was professionally. Every win was in there, every save, every late night and early morning. I didn't move anything, I didn't copy anything. I didn't send anything to my personal email. That wasn't who I was, but I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at it the way someone else might, and it was a lot. Thursday morning came up faster than I expected. I left the house at 7:30, which gave me enough time to get to the coffee shop early without looking like I was trying to. Karen had asked me, while I was knotting my tie in the hallway mirror, whether I was nervous. I told her I wasn't, and I meant it. Nervous was the wrong word. Focused was closer. I had spent the last 48 hours running through what I wanted to say, what I wanted to ask, and more importantly, what I wanted to listen for. A conversation like this one isn't really about what you say. It's about what the other person reveals between the sentences. The coffee shop was on the ground floor of an office building downtown, the kind of place where half the tables are taken up by people pretending they aren't having job interviews. I got there at 7:48, ordered a black coffee, sat at a corner table where I could see the door. Stephen walked in at 7:59. I noticed that too. People who arrive exactly 1 minute early are people who care about how they're perceived without wanting it to look like they do. He looked good. Better than he had 4 years ago. There's a particular kind of presence people develop when they're in a role that actually fits them, and Stephen had it. Relaxed shoulders, clear eyes, the handshake of someone who isn't performing his own confidence. He sat down across from me, ordered a flat white from a passing server without looking at the menu, and got right to it. "Daniel," he said, "before you tell me anything, let me tell you what I already know." He paused for a second, then continued. "I've been hearing your name for years, not from you, from other people, clients we share, vendors we've both worked with, even a couple of your old colleagues who have come over to our side. Everyone says the same thing. Daniel Brooks is the one who actually makes that company work. So when I saw your message Tuesday night, I wasn't surprised. I was relieved. I didn't say anything for a moment, not because I didn't have a response, because I wanted to let the words sit. There's a discipline to that. When someone gives you a piece of information that matters, the worst thing you can do is rush past it. You let it settle. You let them see that you heard it. So I just nodded, took a slow sip of my coffee, and then I told him what had happened on Monday. The whole thing. The room, the clock, the 6 minutes, the handshake with Mike. I didn't make it sound dramatic. I didn't editorialize. I just laid it out the way I had laid it out for Karen. Stephen listened the way people who run real operations listen. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod too much. He just watched my face and absorbed it. When I was done, he set his coffee down, leaned back, and asked me one question. "What do you want next?" That was the question. Not what are you looking for? Not what would make you happy. What do you want next? The framing mattered because it assumed I already had an answer. And the strange thing was, I did. I hadn't put it into words until that moment, but it had been forming for years, quietly, underneath the loyalty and the routine. I told him I wanted ownership, not a bigger title for the sake of it, not more money for the sake of it. I wanted to be in a role where the work I did was actually the work I was credited for. I wanted to build something where my fingerprints were visible. I wanted to stop being the institutional memory and start being the person who decided what got built next. Steven smiled. Then he said we should keep talking. We talked for another 40 minutes. The conversation shifted, the way these conversations do once both people understand they're no longer feeling each other out. Steven started describing his company's operations group, where they were strong, where they were thin, where they had been trying to fill a gap for almost a year without finding the right person. He didn't oversell any of it. He didn't pitch me. He just talked about the work the way someone talks about something they actually understand. That alone was a kind of relief. I had spent 12 years in meetings where leadership described our operations like they had read about them in a memo. Steven described his operations like he had lived in them. When he got to the role he had in mind, he didn't name a title. He described responsibilities first. End-to-end ownership of a portfolio that was about the same size as the one I currently managed, but with more autonomy and a flatter reporting line. Direct access to the executive team. A seat at the strategic planning table, not as a contributor but as a decision maker. He talked about a specific client segment they were trying to grow into and said, without any drama, that he thought I was probably the only person in the city who actually knew how to do it. Then he said the title, Vice President of Operations. He said it the way you mentioned something almost in passing, because by that point the title was the smallest part of what he was describing. I kept my face steady. That was the discipline. I had learned a long time ago that the moment you let someone see how much an offer matters to you, the negotiation tilts. So I asked questions instead, about the team, about the reporting structure, about the executive who would be above me, about how decisions actually got made when there was disagreement. Steven answered all of them directly. No hedging, no corporate language. When he didn't know something, he said he didn't know it. When he had an opinion, he said it was his opinion. Then we got to compensation. He didn't ask me what I was making. That was deliberate. Anyone who asks what you're making is anchoring the conversation to your past instead of your value. Steven skipped that entirely. He told me what the role paid, base salary first, then the bonus structure, then the equity component, which was something I had never had access to in 12 years at my current company because we weren't publicly traded and the private equity owners kept that pool closed to anyone below the C-suite. He told me all of it in even, unhurried sentences, the way someone tells you the weather forecast. I did the math in my head. I'm good at math in my head. By the time he finished the third sentence, I had already calculated that the total compensation, conservatively, was roughly 3 times what I was currently earning. Not 3 times the base, 3 times the total, and the equity could push it higher depending on how the next 2 years played out. I didn't react. I asked one more question. I asked when they were looking to fill the role. Steven said they were ready to move as soon as they found the right person, but that he wasn't going to pressure me on timing because he understood I had a transition to manage. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, take a week. Talk to your wife. Think about it. If you want to come in and meet the rest of the leadership team, we'll set it up. If you decide it's not the right fit, no hard feelings. We've known each other a long time, and I'd rather you make the right call than the fast one. I appreciated that more than I let on. We finished our coffees. He paid. We shook hands on the sidewalk outside, and I watched him walk back toward his building. I didn't go straight back to my office. I drove to a parking garage 3 blocks from my building, parked on the 4th level where it was quiet, and sat in my car for almost 20 minutes. Not because I needed to think. Because I needed to let what had just happened settle into something I could carry into the rest of my day. There's a particular weight that comes with knowing your life is about to change, not in a way anyone around you can see yet, in a way only you can feel. And until you've held that weight for a few minutes alone, it's hard to walk back into a room of people who don't know what you know. I called Corinne from the car. I didn't tell her the number. I told her the role, the structure, the autonomy, the equity, and then I told her we should talk about it properly that night. She asked one question. She asked if it was what I wanted. I told her it was the closest thing to what I wanted that I had ever been offered. She was quiet for a second and then she said, then you should take it, Just like that. No hedging. No list of concerns. She had been watching me carry the weight of that company for 12 years, and she was ready to watch me put it down. I got back to the office a little after 10 a.m. The morning had moved on without me. There were 32 unread emails, 2 missed calls, and a meeting reminder for an 11 a.m. sync I had completely forgotten about. I went through all of it the way I always did. Calm, methodical, caught up within an hour. Nobody noticed I had been gone longer than usual. Nobody ever notices when someone like me steps away, because the systems I had built kept running whether I was in the room or not. That used to feel like a quiet kind of pride. Now it felt like the most important piece of evidence in a case I was building against staying. The 11 a.m. sync was with Mike, our first official weekly alignment meeting. He had booked it as a standing 30 minutes, every Thursday at 11. He had even sent me an agenda template the night before, which was a small detail I noted with some amusement. 12 years in, and I was now receiving agenda templates from a man whose first major client win had been a deal I closed in 2019 and handed to him to manage during a reorganization. He came in with a notebook, actual paper, pen clipped to the spiral. He sat down, opened to a fresh page, and asked me to walk him through my top 3 priorities for the quarter. I did. Calmly, in order, with the relevant context. He took notes. He asked follow-up questions, most of which were reasonable, a few of which revealed gaps in his understanding of how the portfolio actually worked. I answered all of them without flinching, without correcting him too directly, without letting him see what I now knew about the gap between his version of the department and the actual one. At one point, he asked me what I thought the biggest risk was going into the next 2 quarters. I told him the truth. I told him the biggest risk was knowledge concentration. I said the department had grown faster than its documentation, and a lot of operational decisions lived in the heads of a few key people. I said if any of those people were to leave suddenly, the impact would be significant and would take 6 to 9 months to fully recover from. Mike nodded. He wrote it down. He said, "That's a great insight. We should think about how to mitigate that." He had no idea I was describing myself. He had no idea the mitigation he needed to build was already too late to build. The week that followed had a strange double rhythm to it. On the surface, I went to work, attended meetings, answered emails, and continued the transition conversations with Mike. Underneath, I was running a quiet, parallel process. I met with Steven's leadership team on Tuesday evening after hours at a private dining room in a hotel downtown. 3 executives, including the COO, 2 hours of conversation. No slides, just talking. I had been in enough interviews in my career to know the difference between a panel that was evaluating me and a panel that was selling me. This was the second kind. They asked questions, but the questions were about how I would approach the work, not whether I was capable of doing it. They had already decided I was capable. They wanted to know what it would feel like to have me in the room. By the end of the dinner, the COO leaned forward and asked me directly, "What's it going to take to get you to say yes? Not what are you looking for? What's it going to take?" I told him the truth. I told him the compensation Steven had outlined was already strong, and what I cared about more than the number was the scope and the autonomy. I told him I wanted clarity on the first 100 days, what I would own, what I would inherit, what decisions I would be expected to make in the first quarter without needing approval. He nodded. He said he would send me a written summary by Friday. Friday morning, the email came in at 8:14 a.m. I read it on my phone in the kitchen, standing next to the coffee maker. The summary was 3 pages. Compensation confirmed. Scope confirmed. Reporting line confirmed. First 100 days outlined with specific deliverables and explicit authority levels. The last line of the email was 1 sentence. "We would like to extend a formal offer. Let us know when you're ready." I called Steven at 9 a.m. I told him I was in. He said, "Welcome aboard." The whole exchange took less than 3 minutes. Some decisions take months. Some take a single phone call because every conversation that led up to it had already done the work. The next part was the hard part. Not emotionally, operationally. I had to manage an exit from a company that had defined 12 years of my professional life, in a way that protected my reputation, honored my own standards, and didn't burn any bridges I wasn't actively choosing to burn. That meant a clean resignation letter, a reasonable notice period, a transition plan that was professional, complete, and explicitly within the scope of what was reasonable to ask of someone leaving. I drafted the letter that weekend. I kept it short, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph stated my intention to resign and my last day. The second paragraph thanked the company for the opportunity and the experience. The third paragraph offered to support a structured transition during my remaining time. I read it 3 times. I didn't include any of the things I could have included. I didn't mention Monday's meeting. I didn't mention Mike. I didn't mention the 12 years or the bonus or the room or the clock. None of that belonged in a resignation letter. A resignation letter is a document. It isn't a place to settle anything. Monday morning, I requested a meeting with my VP. I asked for 30 minutes. I told his assistant it was a sensitive matter and that I would prefer not to share the topic over email. She booked me in for 11:30. I spent the rest of the morning answering routine emails, reviewing a client report, and finalizing the documentation for 2 ongoing initiatives. The same kind of work I had done every Monday morning for over a decade. The difference was that this Monday, every task I completed was the last time I would complete it. I walked into the VP's office at 11:29. He was on a call. He waved me in and held up a finger. I sat down in the chair across from his desk and waited. The office had the same layout it had 8 years ago when I had first sat in it as a newly promoted senior manager. Same desk. Same bookshelf with the same unread management books. Same framed photograph of his daughter at her college graduation, which was now almost a decade out of date. The only thing that had changed was the man behind the desk, who had aged in the slow, uneven way executives age when they've been holding a title slightly above their capability for too long. He wrapped up his call and turned to me. "So," he said, "what's going on?" I didn't waste his time. I told him I was resigning. I told him my last day. I slid the printed letter across the desk. He didn't pick it up immediately. He just looked at me. For the first time in years, I saw something in his face that wasn't part of the script. It wasn't surprise. It was calculation. He was running the numbers in his head the same way I had run them in mine the week before. He was thinking about the portfolio, about the clients, about the upcoming quarter, about what my departure meant for him personally, because everything in that building always came back to what it meant for him personally. "Daniel," he said, "can we talk about this?" I told him we were talking about it. He asked what had prompted the decision. I told him the truth in the most diplomatic version I could offer. I told him I had received an opportunity that aligned more closely with my long-term goals, and that after careful consideration, I had decided to accept it. I didn't mention Monday. I didn't mention Mike. I didn't need to. He knew. We both knew. The only question was whether he was going to pretend not to know. He pretended not to know. He said this came as a surprise. He said I had been a critical part of the team. He said leadership was committed to my growth and that they had plans for me. Plans. That was the word he used. He didn't say what the plans were. He didn't say when the plans had been made. He didn't say why none of the plans had been mentioned to me at any point in the last 12 months, including the previous Monday at 5:08 p.m. when the actual plan had been announced in a glass office. I told him I appreciated that, but my decision was final. He asked if compensation was the issue. I told him it wasn't. He asked if there was anything they could do. I told him there wasn't. He sat back in his chair. He looked at the letter. He looked at me. And then he said something that almost made me laugh. He said, "Daniel, I have to be honest, this puts us in a very difficult position." I just looked at him. I didn't say anything for a moment. I let the sentence sit in the room because it was the most accurate thing he had said in the entire conversation, and he didn't even realize how accurate it was. The next hour was a blur of process. HR was called in. Forms were started. A counteroffer was hinted at twice, both times vaguely, both times without any specifics. I declined both times without elaboration. By 1:30 p.m., the news had quietly started to spread through the department. By 3 p.m., Mike came to my office. He closed the door behind him. He sat down. He didn't say anything for almost 10 seconds. Then he said, "I didn't see this coming. I told him I knew. He asked if it was because of Monday. I told him it wasn't only because of Monday. But that Monday had clarified something. The 2 weeks of notice that followed were the strangest 2 weeks of my professional life. The company moved through several distinct phases of reaction, and I watched each one unfold the way you watch a process you helped design from the outside for the first time. The first phase was denial. For about 48 hours, leadership treated my resignation as a problem that could still be solved if the right combination of conversations happened. The VP scheduled a follow-up meeting on Wednesday. He brought in the CFO. They presented what they called a retention package. It included a meaningful raise, a one-time retention bonus, and a vague description of a new role that would be created specifically for me. The role had no defined scope. The reporting line was unclear. The raise was significant but still less than half of what I was about to make. I thanked them. I declined. The second phase was bargaining. On Thursday, the COO, who I had spoken to maybe 4 times in 12 years, asked me to lunch. He took me to a restaurant I had never been to, ordered a bottle of wine I didn't drink, and spent 90 minutes telling me how much the company valued my contributions. He used the word valued 17 times. I counted. He asked if there was any version of an offer that would change my mind. I told him there wasn't. I wasn't being stubborn. I was being clear. The offer I had accepted wasn't just better on paper. It was better in every dimension that mattered, and I had already crossed an internal line that no counteroffer could pull me back across. He understood. He didn't push. He paid the bill, shook my hand, and wished me well. That part was decent. I respected him more in that lunch than I had in the previous 12 years combined. The third phase was acceptance, and acceptance was where things got interesting. Once leadership accepted I was actually leaving, the operational reality of my departure started to hit them. Mike began scheduling longer transition meetings. He brought in 2 junior managers to shadow me. He asked for documentation on processes that had never been documented. He asked for client backgrounds I had stored entirely in memory. He asked for the relationship history with vendors I had been managing personally for years. I gave him everything I reasonably could. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't withhold anything. I just provided what was within scope, and the scope was already larger than what most people leaving a company would offer. What became clear, very quickly, was that the scope wasn't enough. There was no way to transfer 12 years of judgment in 2 weeks. There was no way to write down the 1,000 small decisions I had made over the years about which client to push back on, which vendor to trust, which internal escalation to ignore because it would resolve itself in 3 days. That kind of knowledge doesn't live in documents. It lives in pattern recognition that took over a decade to build. Mike was a smart man. He was going to learn. But he wasn't going to learn in 2 weeks, and he wasn't going to learn in 2 quarters. He was going to learn the way I had learned, by sitting in the seat for years and watching what broke. Word started to leak out about where I was going. I hadn't said it publicly, but the industry is small. By the end of the first week, half the department had heard. By the second week, the clients had heard. I received 6 phone calls from clients during my notice period. 3 of them very politely asked if there was any way they could move their accounts with me. I told them I appreciated the trust, but I wasn't going to discuss anything until after my start date at the new company. That was the right answer, not just legally, ethically. There are lines you don't cross even when you're leaving. My last day at the company was a Friday. I had requested no farewell event, no cake in the break room, no group email from leadership announcing my departure. I told HR I preferred a quiet exit, and to their credit, they honored it. I came in at my normal time. I worked a normal day. I had one final transition meeting with Mike in the afternoon. He thanked me. He told me he hoped we would stay in touch. I told him I wished him well, and I meant it, in the limited way you can mean something like that when you're leaving someone with a job they aren't yet ready to do. At 5:47 p.m. on a Friday in late spring, I shut down my computer for the last time, packed a single cardboard box with the few personal items I had kept at my desk, and walked out of the building. No one stopped me. No one called my name. 12 years ended the same way they had begun, quietly, on a Friday. At the end of a work week that, to everyone else, looked like every other work week, I started at the new company the following Monday. The contrast was immediate. My office had a window. The team I inherited had been briefed in advance and had read a one-page background document on who I was and what I had done. The COO came down to my floor on my first day to welcome me personally and to introduce me to the leadership group. By the end of my first week, I had been included in 3 strategic decisions that, at my previous company, I would not have been in the room for. By the end of my first month, I had restructured 2 processes in the portfolio I had been hired to lead, and the changes I had recommended had been approved without needing to be reframed by someone with a higher title. That was the part that took some getting used to. Being heard the first time, not having to translate my work into language that flattered someone else's understanding of it. My first paycheck cleared on the 15th of the following month. I looked at the deposit, then I looked at it again. Karen and I had dinner that night at a restaurant we used to walk past for years without going into, not because we were celebrating the money. We were celebrating something quieter than that. We were celebrating the part where I had finally stopped letting other people decide what my work was worth. I heard things about my old company over the following months. A senior client I had managed for 8 years left within 90 days of my departure. 2 of the operational improvements I had been pushing for in my last year were quietly walked back. Mike, by all accounts, was struggling. Not failing, struggling. The way someone struggles when they have been promoted into a role they earned politically but didn't earn operationally. I didn't take any pleasure in that. I had nothing to prove to anyone over there anymore. What was happening at that company was their problem now, not mine, and I had finally learned the difference. I think about that Monday sometimes, the glass office, the 5:08 p.m. clock, the 6 minutes between the announcement and the hallway. At the time, it felt like the worst moment of my career. Now I understand it was the moment that finally gave me permission to leave. The promotion didn't go to me. They called it timing, and in a strange way, they were right. The timing was perfect, not for them, for me. 12 years of loyalty had been ignored, and a week later a competitor had tripled my income for the same work, performed with more authority and respected at face value. I never regretted it, not for a single day. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.